It's that time of year again, ladies and gentlemen. 2023 is coming to a close and we need to take a look at all of the imports that were spouted out over the year. I wouldn't say it's been the greatest year for imports, but it was home to a couple of the most popular imports of all time. We're going through the year month by month and seeing how it will be judged by future generations, who won't give a monkeys, but that's not the point. The point is, let's take a look at all the imports this year. We're starting in the cold month of January. For me, January is always an interesting time because there's always a few mildly interesting import exclusives that no one buys because we're all skint from Christmas. There's usually a pretty decent JRPG every year and this one's no different. Various Daylife is a Square Enix title made by the same team as Bravely Default, but just like Bravely Default 2, this came and went without too much fanfare at all. Of course, this physical release came a while after the digital release, plus it was a game that was originally made for Apple Arcade, so of course it's not like a prime-time JRPG, but still I find it an interesting release. Twin Blades of the Three Kingdoms was another JRPG, this time a cheap-looking strategy RPG that was a pre-order from PlayAsia last year, but was dispatched in January. Again, this didn't sell too well, despite the game being half decent, the visuals do it no favors, and even now there's still a collector's edition on their website. And also, if you're interested, I will be covering this game a little bit in my Three Kingdoms retrospective over on A Bit More Jordan. NeverAwake is the star of January for me. This unassuming shooter provided me with a really great experience. It's twin-stick, multi-directional, but it's actually the flow and the amount of content that made me really fall in love with it. There are loads of levels, grotesque boss battles, and even a story. Highly recommend this import. Aviary Attorney was a very welcome physical release. While this did release in Japan last year, in January it got an Asian release, this time with English box art, which is lovely. Nice game if you need some goofy Ace Attorney style gameplay. To round off this month, we had some super obscure releases that most people don't have. Dora Think, the thrilling brain adventure of Nobita, which slipped under the radar because it wasn't realized it had English until much later on. Football Manager Touch 2023, a rather random release in Asia, and Super Retro Platformer Collection, which has a handful of mini retro style games. Good, but not ones you'd rush out to buy. February is usually a sad time for YouTube channels. The ad revenue is always at its lowest and you think you might as well just give up. Also, there aren't many new releases yet. The year hasn't warmed up, and that's why February was home to some interesting but not exactly enticing import exclusives. Again, PlayAsia took advantage of the quiet time to send out a couple of releases that were pre-ordered the year before, the blush-worthy Red Colony Trilogy and the well-made but easily forgotten Sea Horizon. Deadcraft was perhaps the biggest import exclusive releasing in Hong Kong this month, but it still made little impact on gamers in the West. I was actually surprised there was no physical release in the West since it seems like a Western focused game, a zombie survival game, but maybe the physical came a bit too late after the digital release. Beautiful Desolation, the same could be said for this. Releasing in Hong Kong and Japan, the Switch version isn't the best way to play either, but I haven't had the chance to play this yet, even though I want to since it reminds me of old school PC games. Gorgeous. Kemco RPG Selection Volume 2 was the first of 4 selections this year, and it was the first in a long good while. I really have no idea why there was such a wait between Volume 1 in January 2020 to February 2023 for Volume 2, but the floodgates seem to have opened, as we'll see later in this video. The Crimson Flower That Divides Lunar Coupling was also released in February. This is an unassuming otome with English. And by the way, as per usual, if you want to purchase any of the games in this episode, then please consider using the links down below in the description. That is the best way to support the series. If you buy something, we get a kickback, and that's really nice. It's a fantastic way to support us. Plus, in return, we can help you too. If you click our link and buy something, you can get 5% off with our current discount code SWTV23, which will run out at the end of this year, but I'll be sure to update the description with the new code when we get one, or you can just subscribe, click that bell button, and watch our weekly physical series on Monday. Every Monday, our Let's Get Physical series, you will see all the code updates in there. March is a great month. It's the month of promise. It's the month when publishers come out of hibernation, when new consoles are launched, when ad revenue starts to balance itself out, and I tell you, it may have been one of my favorite months of the year. Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse is the star of this month. While I don't think it was as popular as I expected it to be, for me it was one of the highest quality imports that's not an RPG. You can always rely on Koei to give a proper, polished game, and some of them are import exclusives, and this is a game I hadn't played until this remaster. It's the first time it's been in English. Maybe releasing in March didn't do it many favors, but I really enjoyed it. In fact, there was a horror theme to this month with IB, the surreal adventure puzzle game, Omen of Sorrow, the horror-themed fighter, which is a Play Asia exclusive, Disaster Detective Saga, a visual novel with Cthulhu levels of mystery and monsters, and how can we forget Swoon, Earth Escape. It's not a horror game, but it is a game that will scare anyone away with just how awful that it looks. What an import exclusive that is. In fact, March had some really nice variety with an addictive rhythm game in Sixtar Gate, Star Trail with its falling notes and mind-bending gameplay. There was Melon Journey, perhaps the most genteel game of the year, as there's no combat, no way to fail, you just follow a crazy story involving banned melons. It turns into a right old Scooby-Doo adventure. Ray's Arcade Chronology provided another dose of shoot 'em up, and it's one that's not quite as casual as NeverAwake. This was a brilliant package of awesome 32-bit shooters, the style I absolutely love. Love those early 3D visuals, and the gameplay is awesome too. Now, Strictly Limited did do this in Europe, but I would go for the Japanese or Asian versions as they're available right now, and readily available too. The Legend of Tianding may have recently got a pre-order window from Limited Run Games, but it came out in Japan and in Asia in February with English, and you can get it right now. Why wait? The price is super good as well for a very well-regarded game. And let's clean up March with Serial Cleaners. Maybe this was swept under the rug, so to speak, since it's not the prime example of the type of game you guys like to import, but if the original game is anything to go by, this should be a really good game. Bigger, better. Dawn of the Monsters was a limited run game in North America, but Japan got a physical release this month, a much better option these days, although it was difficult to get a hold of at launch. And to round it up, Romancing Saga Minstrel Song, despite releasing in Southeast Asia last year, in March this year, it got a release in Hong Kong with some box art that had quite a bit more personality. April was probably the biggest month this year, mainly down to having the biggest import of all time and the most interesting import this year. Yeah, if you're looking for a collection of classic JRPGs, then look no further than Kemco RPG Selection Volume 3. Oh boy. Oh wait, no, apparently. The award goes to Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster. Yeah, by far and away the biggest game we've sold via our affiliate links, and that's for a good reason. Square in Europe and North America massively ballsed up this release, leaving fans angry and disappointed, but Asia came to the rescue with a fine collection of the first 6 Final Fantasy games together on one cartridge. It is beautiful. But it wouldn't be just Final Fantasy and Kemco stealing the limelight. Buccanyar was one that not many imported thanks to its price, and also the fact that English, which is on the cartridge, is hilariously bad, but for me, that made it even better. This is ship-on-ship battles with customization, lots of stuff going on, anime girls, I really enjoyed it. Mugen Souls, the first one, was sent out this month. This was a pre-order from Play Asia, and is finally uncensored now that it's on the Switch. You can actually bathe the girls if that's your thing, and a decent JRPG, and the sequel, I'll talk about it very soon. Osman was released in Japan this month, and it's an old arcade game that was mostly forgotten about, a spiritual sequel to Capcom Strider. This was done by Strictly Limited Games in Europe, known by its Western name, Cannon Dancer, but if you missed out on that, this Japanese version is more available. Rounding off April, we had SD Kamen Rider Rumble, a cheap looking but also really fun beat 'em up, and Arcana of Paradise, which is kind of like Slay the Spire, haven't played it since I'm allergic to those types of games, and Fortress S, which is a multiplayer game that kind of looks like the classic Worms. May. The weather really starting to warm up or cool down depending on which part of this globe you are on, or if you're in Scotland, you're on your 150th consecutive day of rain. It was a nice month, even if all of the games landed in the final week of the month, but actually pretty good, especially if you enjoy shooters. What with both Batsugun, the grandfather of bullet hells, Drainus, a modern side-scrolling great, and Skyrocket from One Print Games, all getting sent out this month. May was also bolstered by a wider release of one of the most obscure imports of all time, Monster Fruit Academy. While this is not a great game, it was previously exclusive to a certain retail store only in Taiwan, making it very difficult to get a hold of for Westerners, because it did have English, but we finally got the chance to pick it up. We also had Kizuna AI Touch the Beat, a reworking of a VR game. It's a rhythm game, an anime take on Beat Saber, that kind of thing. Ruby Arrowfell was done by Limited Run Games in North America, but if you missed that, then the Japanese version is now a fine option. If you want an action platformer, Akai Ito and Aoshiro HD Remaster was done by Strictly Limited Games in Europe, and may I say for the better. That's the first time I've ever said that. It might be better to go with them compared to this Japanese release. At least they have a standard edition, whereas the Japanese version is exclusively a collector's edition, which, maybe not everybody wants. And it's one of an increasing amount of Yuri VNs. And finally, there was the unassuming Handy Games Deluxe Pack, which offered up to 3 nice games in one affordable package. June started the summer heat. There weren't too many imports, but a couple of big ones that everyone should own. The biggest being Etrian Odyssey Origins Collection, which is the first 3 games in the Etrian Odyssey series remade for the Nintendo Switch and doing a commendable job adapting almost the impossible. This is an ungodly amount of RPG content in one package, with 3 huge games to delve deep into dungeons with your team and solve mysteries within. I really enjoyed these games and they did an amazing job. Just make sure to get the Hong Kong version, not the Japanese one, as that does not have English. The same could be said for Tristia Legacy and Restore Bundle, which released in Japan a while back, but finally the English version was released in Asia. This is a non-essential but totally essential double pack for me, as these are crafting puzzle games, seemingly a bit like Overcooked, I suppose, before that was even a thing, but you do it by yourself and you unlock rather nice CGs as a result. 2 games in one, first time in English. But going back to something much bigger, much more tragic that there was no Western physical release, Ghost Trick. Man, Capcom are weird sometimes. This is an amazing adventure puzzle game, originally on the DS, but now given a second chance of life, and they only stuck it on the eShop in the West. Come on, guys. Well, at least Asia and Japan got the goods with a physical release that has English, and you should 100% import it, guys, okay? We got to finish off the Grisaya Phantom Trigger series with the second half of it, and Telenet Shooting Collection, which does not have English, and Limited Run are doing an English version, but still this Japanese one is an accessible option. July was not only hot in temperature, but also in import game releases. It was a really bad month for my mom to come visit me in China. I'm busy, mom, go home. Atelier Marie Remake is perhaps the biggest one in terms of what you guys would be importing. A JRPG, check. Atelier series, check. Gravity-defying cleavage, absolutely check. It's not been as huge as the mysterious Trilogy, and I'm talking about the games now, and nowhere near close to the Dusk Trilogy, the triple pack, but I get it. It's a simple rendition of when the series was at its most basic. Cute as buttons though, and I do recommend it. For me, from a personal standpoint, the most interesting release was Nobunaga's Ambition Awakening. The Asian version having English, fantastic. First time the series has been on the Switch in English, and it's a great accompaniment to the Three Kingdoms game, which is my favorite import of all time. Thankfully, they seem to have printed a few more copies of this, but just as I started recording, it sold out, so who knows? But the quality was throughout the month with Cross Tales, a surprisingly great tactical RPG that really understands why Final Fantasy Tactics was so well loved. It had Bloodstained Curse of the Moon Chronicles, a far more accessible double pack of great retro style games. Limited Run did these individually, but this Japanese version, much better in my opinion. TouHou New World, an interesting mix of action RPG and bullet hell shooter, really good stuff. There was even some shooter goodness with the now rather rare Trouble Witches. Anyone seen this for a decent price? And Zero Fire, another quality package put together by M2. That does not have English, but that's not so important. Rounding off this mammoth month was Psychic 5, a remake of an arcade game, Yuoni, one of the cheapest imports of all time, and Gunya Monster, which is a 4v1 online game that's a mix of Dead by Daylight and Splatoon. At least that's what the trailer says to me. None of these bunch are essential, but cheap ones that you may want to bolster your order with. August started to cool things down a little bit, although I suppose Sense's Midnight may have gotten some people a little bit hot under the collar. The sequel to Sense, a cyberpunk ghost story, had a similar vibe, but now in 3D. I didn't like it as much, but I found it commendable for what it was trying to do. This was a Play Asia exclusive. Unreal Life, a really cheap import, a cerebral adventure game, slow-paced and certainly worth a look thanks to its low price compared to like other imports out there. Lost in Play, another interesting release because it was done by Super Rare Games in Europe and they are super protective about having exclusivity. But to make them not cry so much, they took out official English language support for this Japanese release. On the other hand, this game does not need language at all, so it's fine, don't worry about it. Kemco RPG Selection Volume 4 was also released this month, and it wouldn't be the last one this year, offering up 4 more cheap JRPGs in one package. Startup Company was the last, and this was Play Asia's third exclusive by themselves, not in cooperation with East Asia Soft. Have to admit, this didn't hit quite as nicely as their previous two, which were rather exciting. This one is just mildly interesting. September got in on the RPG goodness. Infinity Strash, an action RPG and spin-off of the Dragon Quest series. I like this game, mainly because I didn't have overly lofty expectations about what it was. I knew it was simple but really nicely presented. It got bad reviews, but most were complaining about what the game wasn't rather than what it was. Baten Kaitos I and II was even bigger. Sure, this did get a release in Europe, so I technically shouldn't mention it, and will not do so again in other import roundups, but I feel North American people need to import this, whether from Asia, Japan, or Europe. 2 classic JRPGs in one. Excellent stuff for fans. Have no idea why Bandai in America decided it wasn't worthy, but them idiots. Mugen Souls Z didn't take long following up its predecessor with this once again uncensored version of a JRPG. It's more of the same really. Magical Drop 6. While not a hugely important release, the most interesting thing about this is that Forever Limited in Europe did start taking pre-orders for it for the European version, but they recently announced that it had to be cancelled for reasons outside of their control, which translates to me as we didn't sell enough. So yeah, this Japanese physical release is the only way to go, at least so far. In this month, we also got an interesting development in a Japanese release from years back. Taisho X Alice Heads and Tails. This was originally Japanese only, but in September, it got a reprint with English added. Interesting. October, my birthday month, and sadly it didn't live up to my particular epicness when it comes to imports this month, but yeah, the biggest one also turned out to be the most controversial, at least by those people who like making a bit of a fuss. Mario Kart 8 plus Booster Course Pack is Mario Kart 8 plus all the DLC on the cartridge, well, except one. Yeah, the final wave, Wave 6, isn't on the cartridge, which is not ideal. Of course it's not. Not the golden delicious cartridge it could have been, but still it's better than our scabby western one, I guess. October was home to a handful of management/business sims in Sword and Fairy Inn 2, which was a Play Asia exclusive. Airport Hero All Stars, which is kind of the same as the last one, now with just a new weather system and officially licensed air carriers. And Passepartout 2, where you can live out your dream of being a street artist. Try not to drink yourself to death. Despite it being the month of scares, Japan wasn't really having it, and only had an online multiplayer game, Get Me Out Please, which is another one of those 4v1 games that people with decent internet seem to love so much. I'm jealous. River City Rival Showdown was probably the highest quality title that wasn't a DLC bundle. This was a remake of River City Ransom with new visuals, new mechanics, and even a brand new fighting mode. The special limited edition was a Play Asia exclusive. Party Time was a game that almost slipped under the radar thanks to both the Japanese eShop and Play Asia both saying that the game doesn't have English, but it does. Not exactly a discovery that stands side by side with the Rosetta Stone, but you know, if you need a party, why not? There are not that many party game imports. Hana Awase New Moon was a bewildering quad pack of otome visual novels. You could buy each chapter individually on a cartridge, or you can get them in a big giant box set. Something otome fans would have eaten for breakfast. You could probably make a bowl of cereal with all the physical otome cards, let's be honest. Rounding off October was a game that was announced and released within a week, much to everyone completely missing it. Sunblaze, a balls hard platformer from Leoful, released only in Singapore. November. As the sun starts to set on the year 2023, so have most of the interesting imports, I would say. With the year winding down, we have a gentle end to the year. November kicked off with Genso Skydrift, a kart racing game that I was probably the only person on earth who actually asked for this game physically. Thanks for listening, Japan. This game is old, so I don't know why they randomly decided to do a physical, but I'm happy. You can't fault this month for variety though. We got an incredible shooter in Devil Engine, finally getting a physical release after so long. We got a Bishoujo visual novel in The Fox Awaits Me Hana, a side-scrolling action game in Yohane the Parhelion, Blaze in the Deep Blue, which I promise I will try to learn to say properly because it's from Inti Creates and they always deserve respect, and it is a fine little Metroidvania. I think the Double Dragon collection would have hit much harder if it wasn't already announced for a limited run release sometime in the future, but I doubt it'll be as affordable as the Japanese one. Dyschronia, Chrono Alternative, is a reworked VR game to fit on Nintendo Switch. It's an adventure game as you solve theoretically impossible crime, as well as survive unexpected threats. Definitely something a bit different. Jungarian Hamster became an instant import classic after it transformed from a code-in-a-box nonsense from a few years ago into a full proper cartridge. Now you can stare at a screensaver that has tangible value. Amazing. Rounding up the month, we have Gensei Suikoden Plus, whose marketing team should be very proud of themselves because there was no way I would give this as much attention if they didn't use a Suikoden name. This is a RPG maker style, like a KRPG because it's made in Korea, and yeah, one for the furries. I'm currently downloading it on my Switch right now, so I don't know if it's any good, but I'm gonna give it a shot. December, the final year of the month, and I think without having anything hugely mainstream that everyone should import, there is some fascinating releases that will certainly make niche audiences very happy indeed. And I am happy. Let's start with one that's only an import exclusive for a short time, Sea of Stars. This is getting a Western release early next year, but Japan is getting it early this year, and in my opinion, with nicer artwork. But that wasn't all the JRPG goodness, with the final Kemco RPG Selection of the year hitting Japan with Volume 5. For what it's worth, there are 10 volumes on the PS4, so I'd expect a handful more of these on the Switch next year. They need to catch up. We got a second Football Manager game with the Asian release of Football Manager 2024 Touch. I wonder if this is going to be as rare as the first one earlier in the year. This was also a great month for shooter fans, with two classics returning: Triggerheart Exilica, which was a Dreamcast shooter, one of the last games on the system in fact, and the evergreen Dodonpachi Blissful Death Reincarnation, which is a different Dodonpachi game that's already out physically on the Switch. Neither of these games have English, but that's not important. However, one that does have English is the boob-filled Double Dreamer Double D Collection. Double Dreaming, that's a too long name. It's a Play Asia exclusive double pack, has good gameplay and awful artwork. Visual novel fans were not to be disappointed, with both Curse of Kudan, another Yuri VN, and One, which is a visual novel, one of the earliest examples of the genre, and one that was even more obscure, Sentimental Deathloop, which only released in Hong Kong. And rounding off a surprisingly good end to the year, how can one forget the all-time classic Shanghai Legend, which is a tile matching game. Whoo, exhilarating. And also a quick mention to the Valis Collection Volume 3, an increasingly obvious grift of a few more games that should have all been together in one release. The Japanese release doesn't have English, and it's more likely that Limited Run will do an English release in the future, but this is an option. I don't think English is necessary because the stories are the worst part of the whole thing. And that's it. What did you think of the imports this year? Not an all-time classic in my opinion, but still some good games nonetheless. Stay tuned for upcoming imports in 2024. There's a few known that I'm definitely going to tell you about. Don't you worry about it, because yeah. So make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell button as to not miss it. And of course, if you want to purchase any of these, then please click the document or the links in the description.